The lake had never been still, not truly. Even in its quietest moods, there was always some small movement beneath the surface. The ripple of carp turning in shadow, the long glide of a water snake crossing the reeds, the slow breath of the cattails nodding in shallow rhythm. But that morning, it was the silence that unsettled the locals most. Not the usual kind, not the hushed stillness of mist or early dawn, but a strange, holding silence, like something had just passed through and taken all the noise with it. Emmett Gardner stood ankle-deep at the shoreline, his boots wet and laces crusted with algae. He had been coming to this lake every morning for 32 years, first as a game warden, now as something more uncertain. He no longer carried the badge, but habits had their own inertia. Same thermos, same path through the pine fringe, same old metal bench that creaked when he leaned to lace up his waders. But this morning, he hadn't sat, he hadn't even hung his coffee. He was frozen, eyes pinned to the dog. It had leapt from the dock without a sound, no bark, no pause. 1 second it had been still beside him, its ears twitching at the lake's surface. The next, it was gone, legs stretched, water breaking around its chest. It wasn't Emmett's dog. That much he had clarified weeks ago, when it started following him along the trail from the northern trailhead. Just a mutt, broad-shouldered and sandy, with pale eyes that made people uncomfortable. No collar, number, tags, but it had taken to him. And despite the town's murmurs, the ones that said Emmett should keep to himself, that he should let the past stay buried, the dog had come anyway. He didn't call out, not when it jumped, not even when it dove again. Gone entirely now, nothing visible except the tremble of rings where the splash had been. The lake swallowed movement too quickly, always had, just as it had swallowed other things before kayaks. Rowboats a boy once, long ago, on a warm October day no one in Dry Creek ever talked about. From the dock, Emmett took 2 steps forward, the boards groaning beneath his weight. Then silence again. Minutes passed, long ones. In town, church bells were ringing faintly, though the sound barely reached this far out. Emmett could smell cedar smoke, likely from Walt Jenkins' chimney on the ridge. But here, by the water, everything was still, even the wind through. The spruce seemed to hesitate. Then the water broke. At first he thought it was the dog again, but the shape was wrong. He narrowed his eyes. It was still the dog, yes, but not alone. Its head angled up, jaw clenched onto something soft and slick, something heavy. The dog kicked hard, dragging it toward shore with jerking, muscular effort. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't wood. Emmett stepped into the lake without thinking, boots flooding instantly, cold numbing his shins. He met the dog, needy hands reaching out. It was a coat, no, not just a coat. A child's coat, pink, waterlogged, still zipped inside it. Something small, limp. Emmett fell to his knees before he realized he was falling. The dog released its grip and stepped back, panting, its eyes fixed not on the man but on the trees beyond. It didn't wag, it didn't whine, it simply waited. The girl was no older than 7, curled as if in sleep. Her hair clung to her cheeks like ribbons of lakeweed. Her face was pale but not blue, not yet. Emmett tore open the zipper with fingers. That didn't feel like his. No marks, no bruising. The breath in her chest flickered, faint, shallow, but real, alive. He looked up, but the dog was already gone, trotting away from the shore, head low, tail stiff, not toward town, away from it, north, into the woods. And Emmett, who had once sworn never to follow another trail, without knowing where it led, found himself rising to his feet, lifting the girl gently into his arms, and watching the animal disappear into the trees. By the time sirens began to wail faintly in the distance, someone must have seen, someone must have seen, someone must have called. He was no longer thinking of the child. Not entirely. He was thinking of the way the dog had paused on the dock before it jumped, the way it had stared into the lake as if something had called it from beneath. As if it knew. And behind that thought, a second one stirred, quieter, older, more dangerous, because the last time something like this had happened, it hadn't been a rescue. It had been a warning. Emmett didn't speak when the ambulance doors closed behind them. The girl had been lifted gently from his arms by a paramedic in orange, her lashes trembling faintly as if trying to open from some half-dream. They hadn't asked him questions, not yet. Maybe it was the badge that still hung from the chain around his rearview mirror, or the look in his eyes. Either way, they had simply nodded, taken the child, and left the lake behind in a flurry of wet boots and quiet efficiency. Now the shoreline was empty again. Only the wind remained, whispering low across the water like it was trying to remember something. The dock creaked, the wood dry and splitting at the edges, and Emmett felt the cold again. Not in his feet. He'd peeled the wet boots and socks off back at his truck, but deeper, somewhere just behind the breastbone where his breath had started to slow but not yet steady. The dog was gone, but its trail remained faint, paw prints pressed into the muddy incline. Disappearing into the tree line, he followed without thinking, not because he expected answers, but because something inside him couldn't not follow. The kind of knowing that settles in a man's bones after too many years spent watching the patterns of weather. The way deer scatter before lightning, the way crows go silent before a body is found. The trail was strange. It didn't weave like an animal foraging, and it didn't veer off into thickets like a dog chasing scent. It moved straight, purposeful, as if it knew exactly where it was going and what was waiting there. 20 minutes into the woods, Emmett paused. The light had begun to change, gold warming to amber, then thinning to pale ash as the trees thickened. Sunlight struggled through the canopy, laying soft broken lines across the forest floor. His breath made little clouds, barely visible, but persistent. And beneath it all he began to notice something else. Silence, not the kind that comes with stillness. This was different. There were no bird calls, no rustle of underbrush. Even the squirrels, normally loud, careless little things, had vanished. Emmett knelt near a mossy rise and touched the soil. Still damp, no scat, no broken branches, just the trail, just the dog. And then something, a sound, distant, metallic. He turned his head slightly, not a clang, not loud, but deliberate, like a gate swinging shut somewhere far beyond the trees. A second passed, then another. Nothing followed. He rose and kept walking. By the time he saw the cabin, dusk had begun to settle like a breath exhaled from the earth itself. Not darkness yet, but the promise of it. The structure was old, slumped at one end like the foundation had surrendered to frost long ago. Emmett remembered it vaguely. The Jensen place. Abandoned for over a decade now. Some family tragedy had folded it into local memory as a place best left alone. The roof was gone in parts. The porch sagged, but the front door still stood. Opened out, the trail ended here. And so had the dog's prints. He stepped forward, each movement quiet, measured. The smell hit first damp wood, old mold, and something else. Faint, but strange, like burnt sugar and rust. Inside, the light pooled in soft patches where holes in the roof let dusk filter through. Dust floated in slow spirals, disturbed only by his breath. And there, in the center of the room, was a blanket, curled into a shape. Another child, smaller than the first. This one awake. Eyes open wide, glassy, unblinking. Emmett didn't speak. He approached slowly, crouched. The child didn't move, just stared past him toward something behind. Emmett turned. There, in the shadows near what had once been the kitchen, stood the dog. Silent, its eyes met his. Unblinking, not aggressive but not soft either. And behind it, the faintest sound of something moving. Not another dog. Not a person. Something dragging. Emmett's hand drifted to his belt out of habit, but there was nothing there. He hadn't carried a weapon in years, only a pocket knife, and it didn't feel like a day for knives. The child began to hum, a low, tuneless sound, rhythmic and distant, as if repeating something half. The dog took a step forward, not toward the child, but between Emmett and whatever moved in the dark. Its body lowered slightly. Protective. There was more to this than a rescue, more than instinct. Emmett understood that now. He stepped back, eyes flicking to the window. And then he heard it beneath the dragging sound, a whisper. His name, not shouted, not loud but unmistakable. The kind of voice you only hear when something knows you deeply and hasn't forgotten. The sound of the sirens faded into the forest like smoke, thin, unreal, and quickly gone. Emmett didn't move. The girl lay wrapped in his old canvas jacket, her breaths still shallow but steady. Paramedics had arrived minutes ago, soft-spoken and slow-moving, as if afraid sound might undo what luck had preserved. One of them had asked Emmett his name. He didn't answer. He was still watching the tree line. The dog had vanished, not hurried, not frantic, just gone. The pine needles underfoot were still trembling. A late morning wind had picked up, shifting through the upper branches with a restless hush. And for the first time since the dog had appeared at his side weeks ago, Emmett felt its absence like a hole in the world. He stood just off the trail now, away from the responders. Someone had taken the girl in a thermal blanket to the ambulance that waited just down the old access road. No questions had been asked yet, no names, but they'd come soon. They always did. Behind him, the lake was already smoothing over as if none of it had happened, as if no dog had jumped, as if no child had been pulled from beneath the surface. He stared into the woods, and something inside him stirred, something old and familiar, not quite memory, more like instinct. He stepped off the trail. The pine forest ran deep here, deeper than most remembered. The understory was patchy moss, old ferns, and the occasional blood-red scatter of mountain ashberries crushed under hoof or paw. The air was damp, rich with the earthy scent of decaying bark and cold soil. It pulled at a part of him that had stayed buried for years. Every few paces, Emmett stopped, listened. Once, a hawk called out, high above, sharp and metallic. Another time he thought he heard movement, brush shifting, something weighty stepping away, but when he reached the old split log near the creek bend, there was no sign. Just a broken trail of wet paw prints. Fresh, he crouched low beside them, deep indentations, heavy, confident steps. The dog had gone this way, and not in a panic. It had moved with purpose, almost like it knew where to go. Emmett's hand brushed the dirt beside the tracks. It was cold, still damp from the lake. He could smell the water clinging to the soil. And just then, a memory came back, unwanted but clear. A different day, a different year, a different child. Don't think about it. He stood up. The forest darkened slightly as a cloud passed overhead. softening the sun to a pale haze. The light here always seemed older, like it filtered through time as well as trees. Emmett followed the trail further north, toward the edge of the wetlands, an area once marked off years ago during a missing persons search. A place with history. But this time, something had changed. Along the trail, just before the cattail beds opened into the shallow basin, he found it, a torn piece of denim, small faded pink embroidery at the seam. He lifted it carefully. It was stiff, dried at the edges, old, not from today. And it wasn't alone. A few feet farther, half buried beneath moss and twigs, a rusted thermos glinted dully. Emmett blinked. He knew that thermos had held it, had handed it to a father whose voice broke when he said he just wanted to keep her warm. He crouched slowly, hands tightening against his knees. A hush had fallen over the woods again, that strange held breath quiet. No birds, no wind, and then movement not loud, just a soft padding, then a pause. From the corner of his eye, Emmett saw it, the dog, standing between two trees, half-shadowed, watching him, but there was something different in its posture now. Head low, but not submissive. Eyes alert, not wild. It didn't wag its tail. It didn't move closer. It waited. Emmett rose. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. The dog stepped aside, not back into the forest, but deeper into the basin toward a spot Emmett hadn't approached in years. The overgrowth was thicker here, no clear trail, but the dog walked with certainty, threading through bramble and fallen logs with the grace of something that belonged. Emmett followed, and with every step that old knot in his chest tightened. He didn't know what he was walking toward not yet, but something in the quiet held meaning, the kind that only time and loss could recognize. By the time the dog stopped again, beside a moss-covered boulder shaped like a cradle, the wind had stilled entirely. The air pressed close, thick with memory. The dog turned to look at him once more, then sat waiting. Emmett stared at the stone. Then slowly, he knelt, not in fear, not in reverence, but in understanding, because buried in the ground beneath him, he could just make out the edge of something worn by water and time, a child's sandal, faded, small, out of place. His breath caught, not from fear, from recognition. Emmett didn't move for a long time. The girl's breath came in uneven threads against his collar, warm and wet, as though her lungs still couldn't decide whether they trusted the world enough to try again. His arms, once strong and sure from years of lifting half-conscious hikers out of ravines or dragging lost calves from marshes, now trembled under her light weight, not from effort, from something else, something older. The dog was gone. The woods had swallowed it, not even the underbrush rustling in its wake. The sirens that had started in the distance never arrived. They faded as they had come, as though whatever help they'd promised had taken a wrong turn, or thought better of coming. So he walked, not back toward town. Not yet. He cradled the child close, her coat dripping against his hip, and made his way up the rise behind the lake. The old ranger path now little more than a memory overtaken by roots, moss, the slow patience of disuse. With each step, the forest grew quieter, thicker. The air cooled. Somewhere a woodpecker rattled high in the pines, but otherwise the world offered no explanation. That stillness, it wasn't peace, it was waiting. Halfway up the ridge, Emmett stopped. The girl stirred faintly. A single pine cone fell and bounced once against the earth, startling them both. He lowered her carefully to a patch of dry needles beneath a cedar, stripped off his overshirt and wrapped it around her shoulders. She moaned, turned her face slightly, and fell still again. He crouched beside her, watching, waiting. He should have gone for help. He knew that. Should have run with her to town, found someone with a radio, an ambulance, anything, but something had shifted. Not just in the water, not just in him. The dog had led him here, not by demand, not by leash or voice, but by something quieter. A nudge of instinct, an old memory awakening. The last time he'd ignored it, a boy had gone missing. A shadow passed overhead. He looked up. A hawk, circling slowly. Emmett followed its arc and noticed it, a clearing half hidden behind a tangle of wind-fallen branches. He lifted the girl again, lighter now somehow, as if the decision to keep going had removed a weight he hadn't named yet. The clearing was ringed with stones, not natural ones placed, old worn moss. At the center, a stump charred beside it, a rusted shovel embedded deep in the soil. And around the edges, tucked into roots and hollows, were small things, children's things. A cracked teacup, a torn shoe, a waterlogged backpack with a frayed patch in the shape of a horse, trinkets too ruined to mean anything unless you knew what they were, or who they had belonged to. Emmett stood at the edge, unsure whether to enter. The dog had come this way. He could feel it. That same quiet pressure at the back of his mind. Not pushing, inviting. He took one step forward, then another. A twig snapped in the trees behind him. He turned sharply. Nothing, no movement, but the air had changed. He could feel it in the tightness of the bark, in the way the wind pressed unevenly now, shoving instead of gliding. He looked down at the girl. Her eyes were open. Not wide, not startled, just open, and looking past him. Toward the stump, toward something only she could see. He turned back, slow, and saw the dog, It stood by the far tree line, chest heaving, fur slicked and darker now, as if it had passed through something wet or old, mud maybe, or blood. It didn't move, just watched, but it wasn't alone. Behind it, half in shadow, stood a second figure, taller, upright, human in shape, barely visible through the fog that had begun to slide in from the marshes, a coat, long hands at the sides, no face he could make out. But there was no fear, not in the dog, not in the girl, only him. The figure stepped forward once, and stopped, then it raised a hand, slow, deliberate, not a threat, a signal. Emmett stepped back without thinking. His boot struck something, one of the stones. It tipped, fell, and cracked in half. The air split with it. The girl screamed, not in pain, in recognition, and from somewhere deep beneath the clearing, something answered, not a voice, not a growl, a sound like breath through hollow bone, old, rising. The figure turned, and was gone. And the dog. It stayed, waiting. The scream faded into the trees, swallowed by the hush that followed, not silence but something deeper, a hush that lived between breaths, between words unspoken. The girl didn't cry. She simply leaned into Emmett's shoulder, small fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt as if anchoring herself to the world. He didn't speak either, not when the wind picked up, not when the fog thinned just enough to reveal that the figure was truly gone, leaving behind no imprint in the soft pine loam. Only the dog remained, still and watchful. That it moved first. Stepping into the clearing, it approached the stump, circled once, and sat, not alert, not guarding, just waiting. Emmett followed with the girl in his arms, unsure of what drew him forward. It was instinct again. The same thread that had pulled him toward the lake, then up the ridge. The same thread that had led him here, where truth waited, not in the open, but in the quiet. At the base of the stump, just beneath the loose bark, lay a small silver pendant, weathered but intact, the child's name etched into it. Mara. The girl looked at it, said nothing. She didn't need to. Emmett lowered her gently beside it, and she reached out, brushing the charm with her fingertips. For a moment the air felt warmer, lighter. The breeze moved through the trees like an exhale. Then the dog rose. It came to her side, sniffed her once, forehead to forehead, then turned away. No urgency, no pause. It stepped past Emmett, without a sound, nose low to the ground, tail steady. As it crossed the edge of the clearing, it looked back once, not at the girl, at him. And in that glance, Emmett understood. It hadn't been the girl it was following all this time. It had been the wound in him, the unfinished road, the echo of the boy he couldn't save all those years ago. The dog had known somehow, and now its work was done. By the time the medics arrived, Emmett had already gathered the trinkets from the clearing, gently placing them in his old ranger's pack. The girl slept against his chest, her breath steadier now, her body lighter in his arms. As the stretcher rolled down the hill, and the others gathered to ask questions he had no desire to answer, Emmett turned once more toward the trees. The dog was gone, but on the edge of the path, where moss met gravel, a single paw print remained, pressed deep, as if reminding him that some journeys end not with answers, but with the quiet permission to forgive. He stood there a long while, until the wind shifted and dusk began to settle, across the lake once more. Then he followed the trail back down, not to return to who he had been, but to become someone who could remember without regret.